Chapter 4, Developing Standards for Classroom Behavior. This begins on page 91 of your textbook. The textbook calls it standards. We also know the term standards to be a replacement word for rules. So we're going to talk about developing rules or standards for classroom behavior. Significant reductions in disruptive behavior occur when behavior standards or rules are taught, practiced, and retaught. These are three very important concepts when we're talking about rules. Just like any other skill, this implementing rules in your classroom have to follow this. I used to always relate this during my lectures to teaching the skill of addition. You don't just give a student an addition problem and ask them to do it one day and then test on it the next day. These are skills that you teach them how to add. Then you do practice worksheets or however you're going to practice that skill, and then you're going to reteach it again. The same thing applies to developing those rules, because there may be some students in your class who just are learning the concept of following rules. Maybe they don't have that structure, they don't have rules or guidelines even at home. So it's important to revisit standards or rules as you go along, and that's discussed on page 92. Beginning the school year, establishing behavior standards. It talks about teaching, practicing, and reteaching these skills. So please read through page 92 on that concept of acquiring any other skill and mastering that skill. I've also included some live links here within this PowerPoint, so take a look at those. And then it goes on at the bottom of page 92 to define or differentiate rules and procedures. And the difference between rules and procedures, there is a difference. So rules are those written guidelines that are posted in your classroom or they're given to the students, those things that students are expected to adhere to in the cafeteria, in the gym, in your classroom, etc. Procedures are expectations for behavior related to a specific activity, and we're going to talk a little bit more about procedures. It seems like everybody has a really good idea of what rules are, but the procedures tend to be one of those things that students often overlook, or student teachers often overlook when developing their own guidelines for their classroom. Page 93 discusses the importance of establishing behavior standards within your classroom, and some of the reasons that we're going to develop those. Students' learning is related to the creation of a safe climate in which everyone is treated with dignity. So here are those words, those key words again. A safe, supportive, secure, tolerant learning environment, and that's what we're striving for, that type of environment through rules and through structure, that we're going to develop that type of climate so that learning is at a maximum. And then also students benefit from learning about their rights as citizens and seeing these rights upheld and fostered in the school environment. So those are the first lessons in citizenship that we give our students. There are rules, just like out in the real world. In our classroom there are rules. Those who follow the rules are rewarded. Those who don't follow the rules are not necessarily punished, but they are taught the correct way to follow those rules. And then consequences are put into place if those rules are not followed. Developing classroom behavior standards is discussed starting on page 94, and how important it is for our students to know the value of these rules. So on page 94, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to discuss the value of those rules. Sometimes kiddos just want to know why there is a particular rule. Why is it a rule that you can't run in the hallways? It's fun to run in the hallways, and it's not hurting anybody, is it? And so this is a point where you can discuss the rules and the dangers of running in the hallway. If everybody ran in the hallways, if we let everybody do it, then we would have chaos and people would be running into each other. So you want to discuss the value of each one of the rules. On page 96, it talks about the next thing that you want to do is develop a list. And you can get your classroom involved in developing a list of rules that they may want to see in their classroom. And it's very interesting at this point You can get a lot of insight into your students and the type of structure that they need by the list that is developed. And then number 3 on page 97 is you want to get a commitment. However this is, I've seen really great ideas of teachers getting a large piece of poster board or butcher paper or something and writing down the rules and getting each student to sign along those like around the poster board or whatever the rules are written on. That's their signature and that's their commitment to following those rules and making sure that others in the class follow the rules as well. And then on page 98, it talks about monitoring and reviewing these classroom rules and how we don't want to just post classroom rules, but we want to continuously monitor those and see if the rules are appropriate. We want to make sure that we review those rules, especially in cases where you're seeing frequent violations of rules in particular. You get new students in and maybe they don't know your classroom rules. So it's important to make sure that we monitor and review these, especially in the elementary for the first couple of weeks. And there's a link there as well. The next thing that we're going to talk about in this chapter are the classroom procedures. Classroom procedures are a little bit different because these are related to specific activities. Some examples of procedures are pep rallies, fire drills, passing periods when they're changing classes, rules for turning in homework. What are the students expected to know when they come in with their homework? Procedures for arriving at school, things like lining up for recess. You have to have specific rules for this for every activity within the day, especially for those younger students. Getting on and off the bus, things that also promote safety and structure within the school day. So don't forget about procedures, changing from different groups, changing classes. Procedures are taught best by discussing the need for the procedure, getting the student input, having students practice those procedures and reinforce correct behavior. So for example, let's take the fire drill. You don't simply want to tell the students, okay, during a fire drill, this is what you do. You line up here and you go out this exit, and you wait over here till 3 bells ring and it's time for us to go back in. If we did that and a real fire drill came, it would probably be chaos. That's why we have things like pretend fire drills or fire drills. And so that we can practice that so students get a really good idea of what that procedure really looks like. Do the same thing with pep rallies, lining up for recess, going to lunch, turning in your homework. What happens if a student comes late to class? So all of those types of procedures need to be practiced with your class. Those procedures, look on page 102 and 103 of your textbook, and it gives some really good ideas on procedures in the elementary and the secondary classrooms. Some things that you might have overlooked and think, well, I never even thought about that. That's something that I should put together before the first day of class. Going on to page 105, 104 gives another good figure on key classroom procedures. 105 talks about teaching and monitoring those classroom procedures. And then the rest of your textbook gives you some case studies that I'd like for you to read through as well. Interesting case studies. And then on page 111, there are some classroom management skills that help maximize on-task behaviors. So we want to make sure that we want on-task behaviors and not off-task behaviors. And I've actually kind of run out of the PowerPoint slides, so I want you to read page 111. And it talks about on page 112 things like arranging the classroom, and then some methods. Things for beginning a lesson, and then some methods. And then on page 113, giving clear instructions and some methods to give clear instructions. And then on page 114, maintaining attention. On page 115, 114 and 115, it talks about some wait time and how important wait time is to our students and to our classroom management. You know, who would have thought of things like wait time? Then on page 117, it talks about pacing and how important that can be, and it also provides you with some methods. Things like seat work. Seat work oftentimes gets a bad rap, but seat work, when it's used effectively can be a really good tool. There's some methods on page 117 and 118 on how to use seat work effectively. Summarizing starts on page 118 and 119. Providing useful feedback and evaluation starts on page 119. 120, making smooth transitions, and some methods in which we can make some smooth transitions within our class day. So starting on page, I believe that was, starting on page 111, down there in figure 413, all of those instructional management skills that facilitate on-task behavior, because we remember that classroom management, classroom behavior is dictated by the type of teacher that we are. And when we have students that are engaged in good instruction, they're engaged in relevant lessons, and they're interested, then that on-task behavior is maximized. And so we're not worried about little minor classroom disruptions because students are off task and students are bored. So there are 11 different skills there, instructional management skills, that you need to read through and make sure that you know methods about, to make sure that you can maximize on-task behavior and minimize classroom disruptions because students are off task. So I think that's probably those are the best pages within the chapter, because it really does give you some very good examples of what to do as an effective teacher and planning for good, effective instruction in your classroom. On page 121, it talks about early childhood settings. And then on page 123, it's got some procedures for preventing some common classroom disruptions. Common classroom disruptions, students that have to leave the room. We always want to make sure that we let students leave the room, especially if they have to go to the restroom and they have some sort of a medical problem, recurrent kidney or bladder infections. Tardiness, conflicts involving homework, that's a big one. So there on page 123, 124, and 125, it talks about some common things that come up within our class that maybe we don't plan for before, but then when we get into that, we think, wow, all these students are starting to come in late, they're tardy. These are some minor classroom disruptions with a little bit of planning and a little bit of preparation that you can start to prevent. You're not going to prevent students from coming to class late. That's going to happen. Mom, dad, whatever is going to get them to school late sometimes. Sometimes they're just late. So we're not saying that you're going to eliminate tardies, but we are saying that in order to have an efficient classroom, good classroom management, you need to know that you're going to have tardies, and you're going to have a plan into place on how to address those tardies. Address when students need to leave the room, or when we have those conflicts with homework. So this is a really good chapter on how to establish rules, the best way to establish rules, and how necessary they are. So please read through the chapter and take a look at each one of those methods associated with each one of those skills, because you will need to know that later in the semester. If you have any questions, post to the Student Lounge. Otherwise, that's going to wrap up Chapter 4, Developing Classroom Standards or Classroom Rules.